Branding. In my previous video where I discussed the topic of the potential plumage of dinosaurs, I mentioned that there actually are some dinosaurs that we do know the colours of due to exciting new finds in paleontology. And I wanted to dive into it a bit more and tell you just how we know what colours certain dinosaurs were. And it all has to do with a wonderful group of cells called melanosomes. Melanosomes help make up the colour and the structure of colour of all modern organisms. And while most fossils do not preserve these cells, some exquisitely preserved fossils do, and that is what we're going to be talking about today. In a nutshell, what scientists do is that they use a microscope to study the structure of the melanosomes present in a fossil and compare those structures to that of modern day animals. And by doing this, we're able to get a comparison that allows us to build at least a rough idea as to what colours dinosaurs were. And in the case of some fossils, we've been able to build up a very clear picture. Psittacosaurus is potentially the dinosaur that holds the record for one that we are able to make a more accurate depiction of than any other creature. As between the myriad of fossils that show not only skin samples, but melanosomes, and even, believe it or not, the rear end of this animal, we've been able to see a fossilized cloaca of one of these animals, along with the percentage of its body that would have been covered in scales and some bristly integument. And all of this together makes Psittacosaurus one of the most thoroughly well understood animals in the fossil record in regards to its visual appearance. Other examples include Borealopelta, the magnificent four-winged dinosaur Microraptor, and very excitingly, a small theropod by the name of Sinosauropteryx. Yes, a small theropod like you, Reggie. The reason this particular example is so exciting is that the melanosomes were so well intact that we were actually able to tell the patterning present on this animal, at least in certain parts of its body. In particular, upon the tail. And we were able to see this animal had a ginger and kind of light beige brown banded tail, a lot like a modern day coati. And it's not just dinosaurs, we have also discovered melanosomes in the fossils of marine reptiles. And many of them indicate something that shouldn't have come as much of a surprise for many of us. It turns out quite a few of these creatures would have sported coloration that we see in many modern day marine animals, having a much darker back and a lighter underbelly, a lot like modern day orcas and great white sharks. And there's a very good reason for this, and it's the same with the other creatures we've discussed in this video so far. All of this is great camouflage. However, not all fossils that we've discovered that have melanosomes preserved indicate that the animals were merely practically coloured for camouflage. We have actually discovered some that indicate something a little more colourful. And a good example of this is the magnificent Jurassic era theropod known as Kaihon. Melanosomes present on Kaihon have an interesting little trait about them in that they feature platelet-like structures. And these platelet-like structures are very much like those found on birds that feature iridescent feathers, particularly brightly coloured iridescent feathers. Now, while we're not entirely certain as to what colours were present on this animal, it was likely that it had these bright and beautiful colours to attract a mate or to intimidate a rival. A common trait we see in lots of bird species today. And to top it all off, most recently of all, there's been a study conducted into melanosomes preserved on incredibly sauropod fossils. Now this is particularly exciting because these are animals that have been depicted as being very drab coloured in media and even documentaries for a long time. However, while we don't know the exact colours in this case either, the melanosomes did indicate something unique. They indicated that these dinosaurs weren't just coloured in a single flat palette. They were likely highly patterned animals, or at least in the case of the fossil that was studied. And this opens up a whole new can of worms because now we can actually speculate with some credibility that sauropods actually could have been much more vibrantly patterned and coloured than we would have previously thought. After all, these animals were far too big to be camouflaging in with anything, so may as well stand out. A feature that would have been particularly useful if these dinosaurs used colours as a method of finding a mate. This is a topic that is evolving all the time as more fossils are discovered, and I truly cannot wait to see what is discovered next. And I'm sure we hopefully won't have to wait too long before we find out.